Oh, unhand me, you brute! Oh, goodness gracious! What's the meaning of all this? You wake me up in the middle of the night and you drag me into this room for... Oh, goody! Work! Oh, just give me 3 seconds to get ready.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Are you tired of not reaching your full online potential? Then you need Surfshark VPN. This virtual private network encrypts your data and hides your web activity so your ISP can't see what you're doing. Surfshark is the ultimate in online freedom, no matter where you live. Not only does it bypass censorship in certain countries, you can browse all over the world right from your living room. Just choose from one of thousands of global servers, and now you're browsing in Bolivia or surfing in Saskatchewan. It can even boost your internet speed for maximum bytes. Support Wrestling with Regret by downloading Surfshark with the link in the description. Use the code REGRET to get 83% off, plus an extra 3 months for free. Thanks so much for watching, fans. Now please enjoy this closed-circuit screening of Brian Zane's review of WrestleMania 5. Now can one of you please take me home? You brought me here in a van.
Well, folks, I hope you've properly girded your loins because we are fast approaching WrestleMania season. And for the next several weeks on this classic segment, why not look back at some of the classic manias I still have to catch up on? Let's begin with WrestleMania 5 from April 2nd, 1989 at Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, New Jersey. This show was nominated by Vermont wrestling fan and the old school video game king over at patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. Fun fact, at the time I'm recording this video, AEW was just in that very same venue earlier this week for Dynamite and for Rampage, and it's wild to think about the fact there's a couple of guys on this show, Mania 5, from 33 years ago who performed in the same venue all those years later on Dynamite. I've said it once and I'll say it again, wrestling's crazy sometimes. 18,946 people in what's now known as Boardwalk Hall, 767,000 people ordered this on a pay-per-view basis. The show also aired on closed circuit. Another fun fact, this show ran in direct opposition to the NWA's Clash of the Champions 6, which featured the main event of Flair Steamboat in a 2 out of 3 falls match for the world title. Needless to say, if you were a wrestling fan around this time, April 2nd was a pretty cool-ass day. Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura on commentary for the evening. Gorilla opens the show and throws down to the WWF Women's Champion Rockin' Robin to sing America the Beautiful. It was a fine performance, but all I could think was, like, really? Like, this is what you're gonna do for your women's champion at WrestleMania? Like, she's, from what I could tell on TV, she seems to be like in the middle of like a program with Sherri Martel, and they do a lot of stuff together on TV. On the special face-to-face episode of Prime Time they did in the build-up to this in February, which, by the way, ran counter to Chi-Town Rumble for the NWA. This whole show was just about people trading promos at podiums on stage. Sherri and Robin's segment, they were just asked, whose corner will Miss Elizabeth be in at WrestleMania? I'm just saying, I think Chi-Town Rumble was a stronger show overall than the face-to-face primetime wrestling. Your opening match sees King Haku take on Hercules, and man, I feel bad for the poor extras who have to carry that big platform down the stairs of Trump Plaza. Bobby Heenan's the manager accompanying Haku, and if you like Bobby Heenan, you'll love this Mania because he's all over the place. Hercules is a former Heenan family member who turned face the moment he was trying to be sold off to Ted DiBiase, said he was a man, he was tired of being treated like a slave, which the Brain reveled in calling him for weeks after that face turn. If you'll remember, Haku won the King gimmick after he beat Harley Race for it back in January at the first ever Rumble pay-per-view, though he's not putting the crown and robe on the line in this match. Haku jumps Herc from behind to begin, but Hercules shows off the power. He gets distracted by Heenan on the outside, which Ventura justly chastises him for. He gets jumped by Haku. Look at the big-ass backbreaker that Haku holds onto for more damage. Haku with the long bear hug, Herc's able to power out, but Haku still stops him. Haku goes for a crossbody off the second, but Hercules dodges and starts to make his comeback. Big power slam and a 2 count. Herc with a flying something, but Haku kicks him in midair. The King with a diving headbutt of his own, but Hercules moves. A back suplex, Hercules holds on for the pin and wins. I'm going to give this opener 2 stars out of 5 for me. It's a relatively brisk match with these two, and that's unfortunately something you'll hear me say with a lot of the matches on this show. I think a lot of them just go too quickly for my taste here, but it told a good story nonetheless. Haku is protected in the loss because he didn't put the crown or anything on the line. Hercules needs the kind of like good win after the journey he's been on since turning face. So overall, it was an okay opener, but okay is the best I can say for it. Gene Okerlund backstage with the Midnight Rockers, Shawn and Marty. A very hungover Shawn Michaels is sweating profusely as he and Marty get ready to take on the Twin Towers. Generic babyface promo. We go to that match now as the Rockers take on Akeem and the Big Boss Man with Slick at ringside. The Rockers a little too quick for the larger opponents early on. Marty distracts the Boss Man and Shawn with a beautiful dropkick off the second rope and that follow through. Shawn and Marty work on Akeem's arm for a while, but he's able to tag out to Boss Man, who helps flatten Marty, and the Biggins take over. Lots of double teaming by the Towers, but one too many times. Marty dodges, we get the collision, the hot tag to Shawn. Michaels is a house of fire as he and Marty double team Akeem, but Akeem with a huge clothesline that takes Shawn's head off. Boss Man misses a flying attack of his own. More double teaming from the faces this time. A big top rope double dropkick that's not timed the best. Small room for error on that one. I do feel bad for him. Boss Man catching Michaels out of the sky and flattens him with a powerbomb. Air Africa by Akeem, and the match is over. I give it 3 stars out of 5, but the stars don't really tell the whole story. I do think this match kicked ass. I think that big versus little matches can make for some great storytelling, and we got that in this match as well. I think everyone got moments to shine. I loved Akeem's big clothesline in the middle of the match, like I mentioned here. The story goes, like I mentioned, Shawn was very hungover on this show, but was able to pull it together, except for that big mistimed double drop kick. The rest of the match was pretty cool. Federation newcomer Tony Schiavone's backstage with Ted DiBiase, the new and very first $1 Million champion. He has strong words for his opponent Brutus Beefcake, very confident in his abilities, and he says his $1 million worth of gold and diamonds proves how good he is. Up next, the $1 Million Man takes on Brutus the Barber Beefcake, and wow, 2 classic shows I've done in a row now featuring Brutus Beefcake, but from very different eras and settings. Like I said, DiBiase just recently unveiled his $1 Million Championship. We were seeing those classic vignettes of him on TV recently, getting the belt custom made and all that, so the start of a very strong and memorable period for DiBiase here. Brutus off to a fast start, backdrop city, then later a big clothesline to the outside. The two trade blows till they get to the ropes, Virgil grabbing the leg and allowing DiBiase to take over. Chokes him for a bit, hits the bombs away from out of the corner. A couple of suplexes before he locks in the $1 Million Dream, but Beefer grabs the ropes. Brutai starts the fight back. He's got the sleeper locked in. Virgil on the apron with a distraction. That allows DiBiase to strike from behind. Virgil leading Beefcake on for a while until Ted decks him again. The brawl continues right in front of Donald Trump himself as both men are counted out. He grabs his shears, looking to strut and cut, but the baddies flee. This one gets 1.5 stars out of 5 for me. I thought it was a pretty decent back and forth in this one, but the disappointing double finish, which I swear is the story of like most of Brutus Beefcake's matches at WrestleMania. It's usually either he wins by disqualification or it's a double count out or just some kind of bullshit finish. And like most of it, not all of them, but most of his matches at Mania have gone down that way. Why is it the case? There's a video from earlier of Lord Alfred Hayes at the WrestleMania brunch. Here are the Bushwhackers eating some food. Alfred wants to get their thoughts on the Rougeaus brothers, but they get their mouths full. It's funny seeing Alfred start to lose his composure with them. Then it's time for the Whackers to take on the fabulous Rougeaus brothers, Jacques and Raymond. They're billed from Memphis, Tennessee now. They're no longer from Quebec, and they come out to the All-American Boys theme. As I've gotten older, I have come to appreciate that gimmick a whole lot more. Luke and Butch chase Jimmy Hart out of the ring, and he loses his blazer in the process. I think it'd be a funny spot if, say, Jimmy had like a spare blazer underneath the top one, like in case of just such an emergency. But as he goes back in the ring to grab it, Luke and Butch throw the Rougeaus into him. A lot of shtick and lots of bushwalking. The camera misses Ray attacking Luke as the ref's distracted and the heels take over. I love the bump Luke takes in the corner here. Kind of reminds me of the one I saw Madcap Moss take recently against Drew McIntyre at Day 1. Some double teaming by the All-American Boys, but a little too much celebrating. Raymond walks into the battering ram, a double gutbuster on Raymond. Jacques can't get there in time, and the match is over. I give it 1 star out of 5. It's a pretty short match that has a finish that feels like it got messed up. Like, Jacques didn't break the pinfall up in time, and like, well, the match is over now. Not a lot of meat on the bone for this one. It's just two kind of silly gimmicks. Like, they're comedy gimmicks in their own way, but with one's face and one's heel, and they kind of collide in this way, and it's all good fun, but the match itself is Sean Mooney on the arena floor, viciously licked by the Bushwhackers. Then it's time to see Mr. Perfect take on the Blue Blazer. Perfect debuting his new look here. That singlet would become an iconic part of his image going forth. The Blue Blazer, of course, a young Owen Hart. Little fashion check here, gotta say, not his worst Blazer look. The Blazer won't be intimidated. He holds his own. Nice counter out of the hip toss into a body slam, and he drop kicks Perfect out of the ring. Blazer works very quickly against his opponent for a while, but he goes up top and takes some big knees on the way down. Perfect does some damage, but Blazer comes back out of the corner, hits a big suplex, the crucifix pin and a kick out. Perfect decks Blazer in the mush, hits the Perfect Plex as it's now called. Mr. Perfect wins and retains his perfect record. I'm going to give this one 2.5 stars out of 5. I think that this was some great athletic work between the two of them. They have great chemistry here, but like I was saying, for a couple of matches on this show, it's just a bit too short. I would have loved to have seen this one go longer. In fact, I wonder if like Owen ever wrestled Perfect on TV as himself. I tried doing a quick search about this after the fact. I couldn't really find anything. If there's anything out there of Owen Hart as Owen Hart working Mr. Perfect, like in any kind of like proper long match, I'd love to see it. Jesse Ventura getting his annual adulation from the WrestleMania crowd. Can you imagine if Pat McAfee starts doing this every year? Then we go to a video from the day before where Alfred Hayes is at the WrestleMania 5K on the boardwalk. Mr. Fuji in his tuxedo as a last-minute entrant for the 5K to show off he's still in good shape for tomorrow. Fuji gets a head start but is quickly engulfed by the other runners. Then we cut to later in the race where he finishes at 19:30, which is very fast. My personal record, by the way, for a 5K, 26 minutes. It's the WrestleMania wrap with Run DMC. Then it's time for this first ever 3-on-2 handicap match for the WWF tag titles as Demolition defend against the Powers of Pain and their manager, Mr. Fuji. Now, back at Survivor Series, Fuji screwed over Demolition to show that he was the boss, but Axe and Smash didn't take that mess lying down. But then in the same matchup, Warlord and the Barbarian help Fuji up and then learn under his tutelage for a while. The feud continues into February when Fuji throws salt into Axe's eyes during a match. That leads to this handicap match where Fuji is a participant. He's putting the tights back on, but of course, he's no pushover because he is a former multiple-time tag champion in his own right. Demolition with some quick shots in on Warlord, showing some good continuity. Barbarian comes in, he gets similar treatment from the champs. Axe begins to go after Fuji on the apron, but that proves to be his undoing. Fuge the Stooge finally gets in the ring with the advantage with a couple of quick shots on Axe, tags right back out, classic heel stuff. Fuji tagged back in, goes for a flying attack, but he misses. Smash the hot tag, he's a house of fire. Fuji wants to throw the salt into Smash's face, but he salts his own man. Fuji all by himself as Demolition hit their double team finish on him to win and keep that historic tag title reign going. I'm going to give it 1.5 stars out of 5. There was good use of the manager in this matchup, like the manager getting involved and kind of picking his spots. Very, very good stuff there. As someone who's done the very same thing in a 2-on-3 tag match for the APW tag titles, I can relate. It's good to see the story of Fuji finally getting his comeuppance, but everything else about this match just felt kind of meh to me. Tony Schiavone outside Randy Savage's locker room, and the champion's making all kinds of ruckus. He sees the camera and he freaks out, yeah! Up next, Dino Bravo takes on rugged Ronnie Garvin, who last we saw in the classic review was Miss Atlanta Lively. Here, Garvin is now kind of like a new patriot, a new citizen of America. Basically, he's rooting for the USA in this feud against other fellow natural-born Canadian Dino Bravo. It's just weird. It just feels like the exact same thing the Rougeaus are doing right now, but it's meant to be taken like unironically. USA! 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 Before the bell rings, here's an appearance by special guest Jimmy Snuka. Yep, there he is. He goes to the ring, poses, and leaves. Thanks, dude. What the fuck was that about? Bravo shows off the strength against Garvin, Ronnie bouncing off him to start this match off. Frenchie Martin waving the Quebec flag willy-nilly as this match goes on. Bravo goes for a pop-up powerbomb, I think, but Garvin takes him down. A series of pinfalls, but Bravo keeps kicking out. Garvin applies the sleeper, goes for a pile driver, but Bravo powers out, but Garvin holds on for the roll-up. Nice. Garvin goes to the 10 punches, but Bravo counters into a reverse atomic drop. The sidewalk slam, and that's all she wrote. Garvin gets revenge by beating the hell out of poor Frenchie after the bell and hits the Garvin stomp. I give it 1 star out of 5, and again, this kind of suffers from the same problem a lot of matches do on this show, where except for maybe the main event and the IC title match, nothing on this show is given a ton of time. They cram as many matches as they can into this thing, but they're not really given a lot of time for them to kind of be fleshed out or for you to really get engaged in them, so I can't really rate them higher than stuff like this, unfortunately. But I mean, the match itself was okay in execution for what it was. In our next match, the Brainbusters with Bobby Heenan take on Strikeforce with Girls in Cars. Rick Martel and Tito Santana back together after several months apart when Martel took time off for family issues. Martel starts off strong on Heenan's men, and we get a couple of moments with all 4 guys in the ring, including some figure 4s in stereo. A bit more grappling. Santana makes a tag to Martel the referee doesn't see, but seconds later he decks his own partner with the flying forearm. Tito all on his own for a while against the Brainbusters while Martel sells. A sunset flip and some great selling by Arn here. Tito valiantly stays in the ring as Martel's back in the corner. Tito goes for a tag, but Martel does not accept it and he walks away. Gotta include this Arn Anderson spinebuster. Santana with signs of life, but the numbers game is just too much. The spike pile driver and the Busters win. I'm going to give this one 2.5 stars out of 5. I loved the story in this one. I thought there was good work by everyone involved. Santana's courageousness in the match after Martel gets knocked out is good, and the big twist of Rick abandoning him was good for the story as well. And then after the match, Mean Gene chastising Martel for abandoning his partner. Martel says he was carrying Santana all these years as part of Strikeforce and didn't even want to team back up with him, even though Gorilla points out afterward that teaming back up was Martel's idea. Rick would soon go on to become the Model, which we have discussed on the Classic Review before in other episodes kind of further along the timeline. But I will say this, as far as the Martel-Santana feud that comes from this after the breakup, go check out the 6-man tag they're involved in at SummerSlam later this year, because it's really good. It's time now for the return of Piper's Pit. Roddy Piper, having retired at WrestleMania 3 and gone on to a Hollywood career, is coming back 2 years later. Howard Finkel reading off a bunch of superlatives about the host. He hosts his own talk show. He never backs down from a fight. He's very rowdy, and it's Brother Love in a kilt. Love's been calling out Piper for weeks leading up to this show and has turned this into the Brother Love show for a bit. He then does a one-man bit where he interviews himself as Roddy Piper, so Bruce Pritchard gets to do the Brother Love voice and his Roddy Piper impression on pay-per-view. I'd never seen this part of this segment before, so it was pretty hilarious the first time seeing it. After a bit of this, Morton Downey Jr. making his way to the ring. Downey, a very prominent talk show host around this time. He'd been hosting it for several years, first out of the New York area, and then it was nationally syndicated. His whole show basically consisted of arguing with his guests and blowing cigarette smoke in their faces, from what I've gleaned from this. Morton and Brother Love trade a couple of insults at each other, then just sit down, and now it's time for the actual Roddy Piper to show up. The star of They Live looking very surly as he makes his way to the ring. Jesse refers to these men as 3 legitimate windbags. Piper begins to cut into Brother Love here. He makes fun of his physique, he spooks him, makes fun of his cheap jewelry, he asks if he has anything under the kilt. He rips the kilt off and strips Love down to his skivvies, and he flees. Piper now turns his attention to Downey, who's been sitting there smoking this entire time. We get that one scene we've seen a million times in all the recaps. Downey blowing the smoke in Piper's face. Downey and Piper trading some good barbs here.
What happened to the warts?
I gave them to a homeless warthog.
I didn't know your girlfriend was homeless.
Downey puts over his zip it catchphrase and basically calls Piper a transvestite, blows the smoke again, mentions that they're good for you and you can live long and healthy like him. Then Piper grabs the fire extinguisher and sprays Downey down. At least good for Morton for being a good sport about that, I guess. This thing dragged on for quite a while. Not just watching it, you can tell, but also from what Bruce Pritchard has said, for example, in his podcast about this moment, went way over time because Piper and Downey were supposed to have a much shorter exchange before the fire extinguisher spot, but they just kept trading barbs and everything, and it went super long. It's like there's a reason that when they bring up this in every WrestleMania recap, like the blowing smoke and the fire extinguisher is all you see of this very long segment, because everything else either needs a lot of context or isn't worth bringing up at all. That being said, it was cool to see Piper come back into his element of wrestling. He would return here and go on to a feud with guys like Rick Rude and Ted DiBiase in his comeback. Back on the arena floor, Sean Mooney interviews the illustrious Donald Trump, who says WrestleMania is the greatest. It's unbelievable. Many people are saying it's wonderful. Mooney gets really flustered in this interview for some reason. Then they play a promo for a No Holds Barred coming up later that year, and Jesse Ventura is apoplectic. He is screaming at Hogan for coming into his territory and says he has a job for Hogan in Hollywood as his limo driver. Damn, that was some real emotion by Jesse in this mini promo here. Then they show a big recap of the story of the Mega Powers, their beginnings at the end of WrestleMania 4 when Macho won the title, into SummerSlam when they beat the Megabucks, then Survivor Series, onto the main event in February, that classic moment where Liz is laid out in the middle of the match with the Mega Powers and Akeem and Boss Man. Hogan takes Liz to the back for her to get help, and then afterward, Savage beats up Hogan with the title belt, then hurls Liz across the room, solidifying his heel turn, and he says that Hogan had lust in his eyes and in his black heart for Miss Elizabeth, and Hogan's like, nah, brother, you got it all wrong. But Savage spending weeks showing footage that seems to implicate Hogan being creepy, being improper and inappropriate with Liz and stuff, and then Hogan would say, no, look at this extended version of the footage, which shows actually absolves me of that. But still, Hogan, like, boundaries are an issue here. It's kind of creepy. Mean Gene interviewing the Hulkster here. What a difference a year makes, he says. Hogan says Macho was the one with the lust in his eyes, with the jealousy against Hulkamania, and the mania was bigger than the madness, dude. Macho doesn't believe in the demandments. He's a cheap shot artist. Hogan then tells a story about Donald Trump getting a team of seismologists to inspect Trump Plaza to make sure that when the Mega Powers explode, that the entire bunch of audience members don't just go plummeting down into a huge abyss due to the rupture in the ground this match is going to make. It's a really strange sequel to the promo he cut last year at Trump Plaza when he would slam Andre the Giant and then like the water would just flood into Trump Plaza and then Donald Trump would swim one-handed with his family in his other arm. And speaking of Andre, our next match sees Andre the Giant taking on Jake the Snake Roberts. Jacob is a snake-up, and brother Andre the Giant's got a huge fear of snake-ups. Your guest referee for the match, Big John Studd, who earlier in the year won the first ever 30-man Royal Rumble match at the first Rumble pay-per-view. It's so funny that these days people debate endlessly about what the Rumble match is supposed to do for people. In the beginning, the Rumble match wasn't for shit. If you were the winner of the Rumble match at the beginning, your illustrious prize was being the guest referee of a mid-card match at WrestleMania. Woohoo! Anyway, the story here is Studd is a former Heenan family member who still has an axe to grind against the brain and Andre the Giant. The match begins, Andre jumps Jake and throws him right into an exposed turnbuckle that no one had noticed before. Even Studd seems to not notice after the fact, so he kind of looks dumb from the get-go. Andre working over Jake for a good while. Roberts tries his best, but the Giant's having none of it. Choking with the ham hocks of Andre the Giant, he stands on him for a bit. Jake starts fighting back, he collides into him, and Andre gets tied up in the ropes. Jake ponders grabbing the snake, but that gives Andre time to fight back. Nice exchange on commentary here when Ventura says there's no way Jake could get the DDT onto Andre, and Gorilla counters with even if he could, it probably wouldn't work because his head is so hard. Andre on the attack, then just kind of falls over out of the corner. I can't really see what happens. Jake comes back, throws Andre into the exposed turnbuckle. Andre throws Jake outside and keeps him from getting back in the ring. That causes Studd to get into Andre's face, which allows Jake to grab Damien, Studd, and Andre in a shoving match. Suddenly, Ted DiBiase and Virgil jump Jake and steal Damien. It's a snake napping as Andre beats up Studd in the ring. Jake chases after DiBiase, gets his snake back, throws Damien into the ring, and Andre flees the scene. Studd disqualifies Andre, and Jake is the victor. This one gets 2 stars out of 5 for me. Obviously, at this point, Andre's very limited, especially in a one-on-one capacity. It's different when he's, supported with a tag team partner and gets a lot of time to rest, but he didn't get that luxury here. I think that the story was still really good. I love Jake selling in this and the heart that he had in fighting back. The story, kind of the diversion of Jake or DiBiase and Virgil stealing the snake, Jake getting it back. It still ends in a big kind of cluster, kind of a finish, but at least the story they told I thought was good. Sean Mooney in the Bob Uecker seats. Jake's the best, Jake's the best, Jake's the best. Back to you. Tony Schiavone was sensational Sherri Martel. She talks trash about Rockin' Robin singing, then turns her attention to Miss Elizabeth, saying she's hotter than Liz, then has a nice hearty laugh at her mega powers exploding. Jimmy Hart's new team goes up against his old team as the Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine, not rhythm and blues yet, take on the Hart Foundation. Brett and Jim with an early start against Valentine, but Greg avoids the second rope elbow and takes advantage. As the heels are working Brett over, they talk about Honky Tonk's Intercontinental title reign on commentary and how it was longer than anyone's, even Pat Patterson's, and Jesse goes, wow, what a relic he is. In like 1989, they're calling him a relic. Shake, rattle, and roll by Honky Tonk, but he wastes time going for a tag. Brett's able to stay in the fight, finally tags in Jimmy Jam, who's a house of fire for a bit before Brett comes back in. Valentine gets in the ring and distracts the referee. Honky goes to the megaphone, but Jim gets it first, tosses it to Brett, who dinks Honky with it, the pin and the win. I'll give it 3 stars out of 5. This is a fine tag team match. I think it got a little slowed down, kind of awkward shortly after Jim Neidhart's hot tag, but they recovered well enough from that, and everything else looked and felt really good. Intercontinental Championship up next as the Ultimate Warrior defends against Ravishing Rick Rude. At the Royal Rumble, the super pose down between these two slabs of beef ended with Rude beating the hell out of Warrior with the flex bar, which then led to this match here. Early on, Rude bumping his tuchus off against the Warrior. He's thrown into the corner multiple times. Warrior's got him in a bear hug for a long time until Rude just pokes him in the eyes. A big old missile dropkick by Rude. Warrior shrugs it off, hits multiple slams, another bear hug, goes for the big splash, but Rick puts the knees up. And as this match happens, this is kind of not having to do with the show itself, but as I'm watching the show, my oldest sits down next to me and she wants to watch the show with me, and she's kind of asking casually, "Oh, Daddy, how old's Ultimate Warrior now?" I go, "Oh, well, sorry, Ultimate Warrior's dead now, sweetie." And then she goes, "Oh, well, what about the guy he's wrestling?" Oh, well, he's dead too. And she goes, "What about the guy in the blue shirt and the guy at ringside?" You know what, let's just keep watching the show, sweetie. Let's not ask questions. Rude hits a big pile driver, and a little bit later, we get this hard-looking clothesline that almost looks unintentional, kind of a similar vibe with this Russian leg sweep. Goes down very hard. Warrior fighting back, fires off the ropes like a rocket at Rude, picks him up and falls over with him into the ropes. They recover. Warrior runs himself into the turnbuckle. Rick goes to the Rude Awakening, but UW's powers out. Clothesline to the outside, picks Rude back up for a suplex, but you've seen this spot before, folks. Heenan on the outside, trips him up, holds him down for the 3 count, and Rude wins and is the new champion. Warrior grabs Heenan, picks him up, and drops him like a sack of crap, which aggravates Heenan's old neck injury. Fun! I give it 2 stars out of 5. This was not the best match in the world. Rude did a great job. Like I mentioned, he made Warrior look like $1 million in this thing, the way he bumped for him. But Warrior sadly wasn't holding up his end of the bargain because he was looking pretty sloppy at times here. The story overall I thought was well done, and that finish with Heenan tripping up Warrior and everything, that's a classic WrestleMania moment and is really a big part of this show. I think it's one of the bigger moments you'll see on the overall WrestleMania 5 here. But the match itself, the story that it took to get there, not 100% great. In your next match, Bad News Brown taking on Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Some back and forth as the match starts out. Pretty evenly fought for a while until Bad News throws Jim into the barricade. The Ghetto Blaster attempt, but Duggan dodges it. Brown escapes, grabs a chair and brings it into the ring, but Duggan responds with his trusty 2x4. We have a weapon fight and a double DQ. Duggan decks Brown with a 2x4 and's got a big old booger on his mustache. I'm going to give it a half star out of 5. It was not a great match when it was in action, and then it ended with that double DQ, which I'm really sick of seeing DQ finishes on the classic WrestleManias, but it is what it is. Hey, you know what? Next year for Bad News, he's got Roddy Piper at WrestleMania, and at least that match will have some more dignity to it. Backstage, the Red Rooster says the student will take on the teacher and Bobby Heenan and make him lose. He's going to take out all his frustrations on the Weasel. And then it's time for the climactic battle here as the Red Rooster battles Bobby the Brain Heenan. Heenan took Scary Terry Taylor and rebranded him the Red Rooster to prove he can make anyone a star. Eventually in January, Rooster got tired of Heenan and left him. Then the Brain would bring in the Brooklyn Brawler to fight the Rooster. Now don't laugh, these two characters were meant to be taken a whole lot more seriously back then. Heenan comes out with Brawler in his corner. Rooster gets the first shots in on the Brain. Heenan reversing an Irish whip, but he misses the running attack. Rooster pins and wins in about 30 seconds. Brawler jumps him after the bell. Rooster just shrugs it off, and Brawler and Heenan just run away. I give it a half star out of 5. I mean, I'm not sure what I was expecting with this one. It was a manager match, takes 1 bump, and that's all she wrote for the match to be over. But wow, that was about half a year of build well spent. Mean Gene is backstage with Miss Elizabeth, who several weeks ago announced she was going to be in a neutral corner for the main event. She says she hopes that neither man is injured in the match. Then we see Sean Mooney being swallowed whole by a mob of fans. Then it's time for our main event. The Mega Powers explode as the Macho Man Randy Savage defends the World Wrestling Federation Championship against the immortal Hulk Hogan. Macho Man, one of the most justified heels in history for going after Hulk Hogan, who was trying to encroach on his spotlight and who of course had the lust in his eyes for Miss Elizabeth. Mach did win the title 1 year ago in the very same building at WrestleMania 4. Miss Elizabeth shows up in her neutral corner before the Hulkster shows up. A lot of talking and posturing from both guys before the action really begins. Savage goes back to the old tactic of using Liz as a human shield. Hogan with the headlock, Savage countering with a suplex, but Hogan shakes it off quickly. Savage with the eye poke and the first aerial attack. Savage using the hair to keep the armbar locked in until Hogan does some tit for tat, using the tights to pull Savage out of the ring. Hogan now bleeding as Randy works the chin lock. Savage and Hogan both kind of fighting dirty here with hair pulls and eye rakes. Hulk's no saint in this match. Jesse seems very justified in his commentary. Savage with the flying knee into the back goes for a cover, but they slip out of it. More back and forth. Hogan just picks up Savage and dumps him out of the ring. Liz goes over to help him, but Savage doesn't want it. Hogan wants to ram Randy into the ring post, but Liz stops him. That allows Savage to push Hogan into the post. Savage getting in Liz's face once again, telling her to leave. The referee finally ejects her. Bombs away on Hogan, and now Savage working the throat, choking him with the wrist tape. He hits the flying elbow drop, the 2 count, the Hulk up, and you see where this is going, folks. The boot, the leg drop, the win. Hogan regains the WWF title. I give it 4 stars out of 5, despite that bullshit finish, but you know what? It was the 80s. That's just how things were back then. Gotta let it slide to an extent. I thought it was a very good match, a classic WrestleMania main event. And you know what? I'm throwing the build into this as well as to why this is such a good match, because you can't really have the story without the build they told in the year preceding that, from Mania 4 to now. And I think it was all pretty darn well executed. And Savage played his role well here. He and Hogan have great chemistry in the ring. I really can't say enough good things about this match up here. You know, Hogan and Savage, it's a classic matchup. If you've not seen it or you haven't seen it in a while, go check it out because, I mean, again, the story they tell is very well done. That being said, my grade for WrestleMania 5 is a C+. This is really like, you could barely call it a 2-match show with Hogan and Savage, obviously, but also Warrior and Rude, but then that match wasn't that great. But I mean, these older Manias do suffer from this problem of having a whole bunch of matches in there. Generally, a lot of them are pretty short. Many of them have bullshit finishes, and that's just kind of like what these Manias were like back then. The matches that didn't have bullshit finishes weren't actually bad matches, but the problem was they were too short. So again, Hogan and Savage is great. There are a couple of hidden gems in here that are good but not fantastic, and then there are a couple of duds in this show as well. So for me, kind of a middle of the road WrestleMania. But what happens when we jump 10 years into the future during the vaunted Attitude Era? Join me in 2 weeks as I look at my first WrestleMania, the Ragin' Climax, WrestleMania 15. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.